On this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling, we will talk about the storyline developments in the Raw, SmackDown, and NXT title pictures. We'll also talk a little bit more about Pat McAfee, as well as much more in the world of professional wrestling on this edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. And back for another Saturday edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I am host Sean Meyers, joined by returning co-host one, Eddie DiOrio. Eddie, thank you for taking the time. Good to see you once again. I know you're ready to go back to school, but before you've focused entirely to the studies, you've been able to watch plenty of wrestling over the summer. And last couple weeks in particular, the anticipation heading towards SummerSlam. We'll get into some of the big matches there. I think all three of the World Championship storylines have had some interesting developments over the past week. We'll talk about that on Raw with Randy Orton, the challenger to Drew McIntyre. On SmackDown, Braun Strowman and The Fiend and Alexa Bliss also being involved. And then the use of fire between Karrion, Kross, and Keith Lee on NXT. One of the stories I wanted to talk about before we get into those, however, was rumors the last couple of days that not only SummerSlam, but weekly programming going forward could have a much different look. We've been seeing almost exclusively the Performance Center used for, about 5 months now? Since about mid-March. And they've made some tweaks. Initially, it was completely empty. They had the seats. They took the seats out. They brought some fans in. They tried bringing some real fans in briefly. That didn't work when there was all positive tests. But it's had pretty much the same type of feel, I would say, for the last 5 or 6 months. So the rumor is they're going to be going to an arena in Orlando, and they will have some fan presence, whether that be virtually, much like we're seeing in the bubble with the NBA, or if they actually do bring in some fans and keep them very much socially distanced, very sparse. It's not going to be anywhere close to normal capacity. So will this make any difference in terms of how the shows are presented? Is this something that you're looking forward to, or is it really insignificant in your opinion?
Well, I will say that, I know we probably won't get into this topic as much this episode, but I think part of the whole AEW versus WWE argument, one of the points that you maybe could have made about the two is that I think AEW's weekly programming is easier to watch with the empty arena setting, mainly because I think Daly's place for them is just naturally a bigger venue, and WWE's Performance Center is kind of like just a little warehouse almost. Like it's so tiny and so, you're not used to seeing it like that. Even Full Sail's I think a little bit bigger than the Performance Center for NXT.
They did an NXT at Full Sail a couple months ago, but I will say that it wasn't it didn't really feel that much different. So they probably kind of view those two as pretty comparable.
Right, and I would too. I don't think there's that big of a difference in size. But my point is that at least if you go back to the big stages, the big Raw, SmackDown, like the natural stages that you see on the weekly programming when the crowds were there, it's still cool to watch that. More pyro maybe. I don't know if they'd spend money on that for nobody, but I think it'll all depend on, like you said, what the fan interaction is going to be, if any. We've seen with the NBA, the virtual fans on the screens, which I think is cool. It's about as good as you can do right now, especially in a bubble. I know WWE isn't really in one. Theirs is kind of Florida as it is, just because most of the wrestlers live there or are located there for the time being if they don't live there originally. But
I would think that I would estimate it probably 75% between NXT and the main rosters residing somewhere in Florida, whether it be Orlando or maybe some of the more veteran guys, maybe Tampa or elsewhere in the state. But if you start working through NXT, you're going to be living in Orlando, at least for the time being.
Exactly. So I think, that's, I could see why they make this move. I think it's the right move, honestly. The Performance Center, it was fine for the time being. And I think part of the reason why the ratings have dropped as heavily as they have is because it's just hard to watch the show from there. But I think something that could help, and I've seen, and this is something I'm personally a fan of, and I've been a fan of, is that the idea of virtual crowds. Now we've seen Fox obviously with MLB try this with virtual fans in the stands as the game goes on with virtual crowd noise. I mean, is that tacky? Arguably yes, and a good amount of people will say yes. But I think it helps. I don't think that seeing an 18,000 or 16,000 arena, empty isn't going to help much, and you're not going to fill the whole thing with NXT talent,
Right. Well,
maybe ringside.
I sort of thought that like the NXT fans became sort of unnecessary when they started piping in the crowd sounds anyway. That's sort of what they're there for. So the whole thing, I think it's very much experimental. They're going to see how it goes. But the rumor is that they're treating this like a pretty significant upgrade. I think the one area where it will help is they already teased that SmackDown will be in a different venue next week. But I really thought for SummerSlam they needed to do something different than the PC. Because we saw WrestleMania there. You wanted SummerSlam to be different. Now, if SummerSlam ends up being the exact same venue that you're going to have for Raw and SmackDown every week, it really won't feel that different. But because it's coming up on SummerSlam pretty soon, it will be a lot different than what people who've been tuning in sporadically over the last 6 months have seen. So I think that will help make that feel like a bigger show than the rest.
And I'd read reports that they were looking at Atlantic City outdoor venues.
I would love an outdoor. I would love an outdoor type thing for SummerSlam.
I heard something about the beach, maybe a cruise ship or something, and something to where fans maybe quite possibly could have attended. And you know what? For as crazy as we sometimes make Vince McMahon out to be, he does. I have to agree with him that you can get by with shows like Backlash and Extreme Rules and even Money in the Bank, being in the empty arena performance center. But SummerSlam, one of your big four, WrestleMania, you couldn't blame them for what they did there. But now we're at this point in this virus and this pandemic where, you can make that necessary adjustment and still follow those protocols to where you maybe could have, I don't think anybody's complaining that there's no fans. I don't think anybody's complaining about that. I think what fans really want is a change of scenery. The ones that still watch, and
that's why they've done so many cinematic matches to break up the monotony. When you have 7 matches that all look the exact same, where the reactions are pretty much the same because you don't have those fans that are hot and cold, you have to do things where you're filming outside of the PC. So that's why I think they've done a lot of these cinematic matches, maybe more than they really even have needed, just to make sure that if you're sitting through 3 hours of a pay-per-view, it doesn't look like the exact same thing for 3 hours. Nonetheless, we'll see how it plays out. Again, it looks like starting next week, this will happen, and then certainly SummerSlam, they will not be doing that from the PC. So we know that'll be different. I want to touch on some of the matches that we're going to see at SummerSlam, and I think as much criticism as WWE has gotten for not maybe promoting matches as well as they should have, maybe dropping the ball with some storyline opportunities, I will say that all 3 of the world title matches, I think, have seen very interesting developments this week. We'll start on Monday because I thought that this was a terrific conclusion to Raw. And I know no one's watching the 3rd hour, so I don't know how many people even saw this, but it comes down to Randy Orton and Kevin Owens in a match. And what happens in the main event is that Randy Orton wins. Okay, no surprise there. He's the challenger for the title and Drew McIntyre at SummerSlam. But the interesting part is what happens after the match, in which Randy Orton basically says, "Hey, Rick, we got to talk." So he talks to Ric Flair, who he's been paired with. And, well, what does Randy Orton do? He attacks Ric Flair. Low blow. Then sort of like a cheesy punt where, the lights went out. Because you really can't have Ric Flair bump. We know this, okay? The guy almost died. But they reference that. It was very emotional, especially on Ric Flair's part. It looked like he was near tears. And so this gives Randy Orton some more heel heat. And it really didn't even need to involve Drew McIntyre to make people hate Randy Orton even more. What did you think of how this played out, the use of Ric Flair sort of as a pawn in this bigger storyline?
I'd have to agree with you that it was about as good of an ending to Raw as you could have had. I was really invested the entire segment because it's one of those things where you knew it was coming.
Right.
Like as soon as soon as Rick and Randy were celebrating, and then Rick said, "We got to talk," or Randy said, "We got to talk." You knew it was happening, but how we got there was just so investing. It got my attention still. It was just to see Randy go on the tangent. He did it first, and then Rick's response was just as good, if not better. It almost turned Rick face. You almost felt happy and sad for him at the same time.
It's one of those things where I and a lot of people are saying, like, why is Ric Flair on TV? Like, you don't need this guy there during a pandemic. But he sort of explained why and how much this meant to him and how he doesn't want to be. It's not about him. He just wants to be around these people who are in their prime. And he spoke about being Charlotte's dad. That made me empathize with Ric Flair and his desire to still come to TV and be part of storylines much more than going in before that promo. So I think that, hearing it from the heart, that was legit, even though we knew it was going to lead to the attack. When you get real emotion, I think that really helps. And we saw that, I think, in that story.
And I'll get into my issue about, letting real emotion show when we start talking about Strowman and Wyatt. But like I said, I mean, I will say, when I first read and when I first saw that this was going to be the title match at SummerSlam, I was a little confused because of kind of where we were going with Randy as compared to where we were going with Drew. I understand it. I mean, I was a little hesitant to see that matchup and say, well, what's the angle? What are they going to take as the angle here? What's going to be the story between these two that forces them to have such a main event level feud? I'd imagine this is the main event of SummerSlam. And rightfully so.
I
for
would
both,
think so. I would
for both of these guys. But I would, they've told this well. They've built Randy up very well throughout the past few months. And the Legend Killer aura coming back. McIntyre's been booked as good as you could have been as the champion in this whole situation. He's been one of the best parts of Raw since he won the title.
And I think both these guys legitimately have been probably the two best men in the company since the pandemic started.
I can agree with that. I think Bray Wyatt has a say in that too. But yeah, I mean, these two guys are right there. It's hard to argue against it. And I will say, the more and more I've been thinking about it and the more I've thought about it before coming on this show, I will say I would not be surprised if Randy Orton gets title number, what was it be, 15, 14?
15, right, which Ric Flair brought that up. He wants Orton to be the guy who breaks his, his 17, get the 17th title reign. But here's the part of it that I thought was really unique is that, again, it didn't even involve Drew McIntyre, but it still furthered the story. And I think that's cool because so often we see like, okay, they're going to do a contract signing or, they do these like very formulaic, like time tested. They went a little bit different here. They just got Randy Orton even more vilified by doing this without even using McIntyre. And as a result of that, you're more inclined to boo him and cheer for McIntyre even without their interaction. I'm sure they'll have some this Monday going into it, but I thought that was really nice that they could tell another story. And then that's another victim for Randy Orton, right? He's now taken out all these legends. Well, there's no bigger legend than Ric Flair, and I think he's gonna have another chance this Monday because Shawn Michaels is now showing up on Raw. So
yeah, it's funny. It's funny how predictable that can get. You're like, well, nice knowing you, Shawn. But
the thing that I hope they don't do is make McIntyre like this huge Shawn Michaels fan. You know what I mean? Like make it about Orton and Michaels, but you don't need. We get the idea. You don't have to say McIntyre is like this lifelong, like, oh, I love Shawn Michaels, because that's really not what McIntyre's character is, right?
No, it's not. It's the brave, hard-hitting, no-nonsense babyface character that, it's funny because if you looked at a character like Shawn, the Heartbreak Kid and all of his accolades and what he was as most of his career, there wouldn't be much to say that McIntyre would be a fan of him.
Right. So it was sort of similar to McIntyre and Ziggler, right? I mean, Ziggler and Shawn Michaels, McIntyre and Kevin Nash, Diesel. Right. And obviously they ended up splitting up, But, we'll see what happens. I think that was a really nice development, and that's the type of story because Ric Flair is so well known outside of the wrestling world that people are saying, Ric Flair, oh, man, maybe I got to see. and tune in. So it is ridiculous that maybe Ric Flair generates some interest in this, but by association, I think it does help Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre.
I definitely can't wait to see the match. That's for sure.
We'll go to SmackDown, and you talked about Braun Strowman, you talked about Bray Wyatt. I didn't think a couple weeks ago we'd be talking about Alexa Bliss in this storyline, but all of a sudden there is a very new and interesting wrinkle because we had already seen the last 2 pay-per-views, Wyatt, some form of him, and Strowman. So we knew we were going to get the third one with The Fiend, but Alexa Bliss's involvement now and Strowman seemingly like having no interest in kind of almost coming across as the heel now in this story after what happened on SmackDown. I don't know what to make because it almost felt like a double turn, but part of me thinks that Alexa is going to very heavily factor into how this plays out.
Yeah, this feud's been interesting, to say the least. There are parts of it I've liked, and there's parts of it where I'm still confuzzled and don't understand it. But the one thing that I wanted to touch on about this feud before I forget is that, you talked about the natural charisma and the natural emotion that you can tell when you're maybe not scripted in a promo. I'd like to think that Ric Flair's promo wasn't scripted. All of that, I think, was kind of him telling it from the heart.
I think even if they script a Ric Flair promo, he's the old school guy that he's going to go off it anyway because he's like, what are they going to do? Fire me? I think he
exactly.
Legend's sort of like, well,
right.
Yeah, you give me a script, but I'm going to say kind of what I want.
Exactly. So Strowman is the opposite.
Very much so.
I mean, I don't mind if they script a promo if the performer doing it can invest in it enough for me to think it's not. Like I'd like to think that Seth Rollins' promos most of the times are scripted now with his Messiah character, but he's so into it and I believe in it so much in his BS that I don't really notice that it's scripted material. But oh my goodness, I mean, Braun's what did he said something last night? It was embryos or whatever, which is something for your organs.
What he was gonna do to the Fiend. Yeah.
Like, come on. Like, who says that? I mean, like, it's not Braun. I like how they're going back to what made Braun popular before, where he was just an angry monster that would just plow through anything to get what he wants.
Right. Flip over ambulances,
all that, like the "I'm not finished with you" version of Braun. That was
the highlight of his career, I think, when he just kept attacking Roman to like a comical point. I think that was the best thing that he's ever done.
Pulled down the big scaffolding thing with the grappling hook and crushed Braun and Brock that time. I mean, that's the Braun Strowman everybody loves, and I think they're trying to get him back to that. But like you said, now people liked that because he wasn't. You didn't know what he was. Braun wasn't a heel or a face. He was just Braun, and I think that's where Braun's at his best. Is that he's not booked to be a specific type of guy. And right now, that's what they're doing with him. They're making him be a absolute, a jerk to Alexa Bliss for no reason. Like it's, and I understand that it's probably an investment into what they're doing with the Fiend, how everybody who comes in contact with them changes for the worse.
And we've seen them all pretty much turn heel. I mean, other than someone said Goldberg doesn't, he didn't, but. You think about the previous feuds, you get like some heel,
Well, I tell you what, you could say Goldberg did turn heel because going back to him and Roman's original build up to WrestleMania, who would you have said was the face in that match?
I would say that if it was in front of a live crowd, fans would have very hesitantly cheered for Roman, but.
I'm just saying, I think that's more what they were going for the heat because he beat the Fiend that night. Right, but anyway, that's before. But anyway, what I'm saying is that I love how they're investing into that idea more because I think that's such a great character wrinkle for Bray. But at Braun's expense, it's so bad how they're trying to make him such a jerk because it's non-organic. You just don't believe it. Like. They did that whole Alexa Bliss interview, and they went over all the fun times her and Braun had. They showed them. They showed all the fun,
which I love when they document history. They actually touched on things that happened like 2 years ago.
Correct. And So then when Braun comes out bald and he's like, no, you used me, blah, blah. You don't believe him at all. You really don't. Like they're giving Braun heat, but not in the way that I would want as a fan personally. But, and to be honest, I don't know why the Fiend is the face here almost.
How does this play out? What is Alexa? Because she's going to be involved in some way.
She's gonna cost Braun the match. I think that's ultimately what it's gonna be. I think Braun will give you like 5 to 10 minutes of, oh my God, this is a new type of guy, and he might beat the Fiend. Like nobody's giving him a chance, but because he's this new guy, he's gonna beat the Fiend.
So does this put Alexa like in like a dark, like completely new? She can't just be normal Alexa Bliss after this, then, right?
I wouldn't think so, because if you're gonna invest in the whole dynamic that everyone the Fiend interacts with changes, then Alexa Bliss got the claw, so like she has to.
And maybe she becomes, I don't know. I have no idea. It doesn't seem like it makes sense to put her with the Fiend, but maybe
I don't want that.
Maybe she has a little bit of a Scarlet type look to her.
I don't want her partnered with anybody. I want the old Alexa Bliss from Monday Night Raw back. That's the Bliss that I want. She's very good as a face. I will say that I like her as a face. She plays both very well. But, there's always that time frame to change somebody. And we all thought that Nikki Cross was going to be the one to snap on Alexa there for a few weeks. But I think if you do this right, that just sets up Bliss and Cross going forward. And you could keep Crossface, and I think last night we had the hug
segment. Don't say Crossface too quickly, or we're gonna get some Chris Benoit flashbacks here on accident.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but still, yeah, I think this is a good opportunity to turn Alexa Bliss heel, but not with Bray. Here's the thing: people are always clamoring for a Sister Abigail character now. I don't know why. I know we have.
It would sort of be just like unbelievable. I don't think you could really.
Yes, Sister Abigail's not real. I think that's the point of it. Like, and the other thing is that if you put a female superstar in that role, I think it takes away from Bray a little bit.
Right.
Because one, the Fiend. I don't think the Fiend did away with the old Bray. Like the Fiend hasn't. I mean, other than the Abby the Witch puppet, there hasn't been much association with Sister Abigail with this character. So that's the first problem. The second is that, do you want the Fiend to have a mistress or a woman? No,
whatever woman has that role, it would be tough for them to ever go to like a normal role after that. You know what I mean? I feel like you would have to bring someone in and say, this is the only thing you're going to do in your WWE main roster career. And I don't think Alexa Bliss.
That's the third thing. You can't do that. You're right. You can't, as a fan, if I looked at Alexa Bliss after that, trying to be a face, after she was, she had a black draped over her head and all the garb, you looked at her differently in the tights and everything again, like the old Alexa Bliss spiked tights and everything. And I'm like, that doesn't, I don't see her as that anymore,
Right. And I said maybe she could, if it does happen, she would sort of be like Scarlett. She was involved in NXT, and I think that Keith Lee has been a very bright spot for NXT. And I'm not a huge Karrion Kross fan, but it seems like they clearly feel very strongly about pushing him and Scarlett, and they have a different type of look. They have a little bit of, I don't want to say supernatural, but they have that same vibe type with the entrance and everything.
They're definitely not normal.
And they showed that on Wednesday, because unfortunately there was not a picture of it, but the video that circulated has already become like a viral video that you can use as a meme on Twitter. He, meaning Karrion Kross, and Scarlett signed this contract. They gave it to Keith Lee. A fireball came out of it right in Keith Lee's face. Now he's blind and I can't see. Rough couple of weeks for eyes in the company after Rey Mysterio was blinded.
Don't forget, the Johnny Gargano Keith Lee feud for In Your House also had car keys to the eyes too.
Yes. Although I would say the fireball may be a little worse, but so that was cool.
I would say so.
That was cool. That's probably not something they could have done in front of the live fans. They probably had to do some, stop the camera and edit or whatever they did, but it worked. It was, I think, interesting. And while I don't necessarily think it's going to be one of like the greatest matches in NXT history, this storyline has been one of the better ones so far because people really like Keith Lee, and this Karrion Kross is such a mysterious character that we're still just finding out about him. There's nothing that's ruined him yet, like an invariably will happen with, you know, a Bray Wyatt or whatever. He's so fresh in NXT that I think it's intriguing.
NXT isn't in the same realm as WWE as far as booking themselves into a corner. And I will say that both character works from both of these guys have been pretty spectacular, honestly. We're learning, like you said, new things about Kross and Scarlett every week. And I really enjoyed this because you mentioned how repetitive and how bland a contract signing segment can be. Boy, what a spin, you know, like what a way to spin this to make it interesting. And for Keith Lee's sake, you know, he's kind of been the sacrifice almost to them. Like he hasn't been booked. I don't want to say booked strong because it's not like he's losing matches but Karrion Kross keeps getting the better of him in every segment that they're doing.
Right, and he like basically tortured Keith Lee's friend right in front of him with Dijakovic. So yeah, he looks very much like he is the one that's the stronger so far.
So that to me, as a viewer, would say one of two things: either one, Kross is going to win, or two, that Lee, being the underdog babyface role naturally, is going to have the rally, win the match, all that.
Which is interesting because you don't think of him as an underdog, but sort of how this feud is unfolded, in a sense, that's somewhat of his position.
Well, they're also two massive guys, so it's not like you look at one and say he can't beat him theoretically, or
right.
You look at the other.
It's not Cole versus Keith Lee.
Exactly. So I'm thinking of this, and I'm like, I mean, NXT, they must have a plan to some degree to get them out of this hole because you don't want to see either one of them lose yet.
Right.
You really, I mean, unless
I
don't
agree.
know.
If this was a main roster thing, I would say like, well, they're going to ruin someone. But you have a little bit more confidence in NXT to make this sort of work without it being super like hokey or screwy for the finish.
The only thing I can think of is somebody runs in and it's a DQ finish, but I wouldn't say that. I'm not going to say that for certain because I think this is going to be the main event of TakeOver 30. I mean,
Which will
I
be
can't
the night
think
before SummerSlam.
Yeah, and I wouldn't like. I'm going through the card in my head. I'm like, Dakota Kai versus Io Shirai, as good as that might be, it's not going to be the main event, I wouldn't think, especially considering the women's title main event at the last TakeOver.
Yeah, this is the main event. I have no doubt about that.
McAfee isn't going to main event his first pay-per-view. You know,
well,
like even
Lawrence
though he's
Taylor
with Cole,
did against Bam Bam Bigelow at WrestleMania. But yeah,
that was also,
I will say, however, if they do decide we're going to do a screwy finish that's not clean at all and it's like a DQ, maybe they don't have this main event and they do Cole and McAfee. That's the only way that I could see. But in general, I would say, yeah, this is going to have to be last. It's certainly the match that has the most significance. I mean, I don't know how you could say that a former football player and a guy who doesn't hold any titles is more meaningful. But position on it a lot of times just depends on what the finish is going to be and you know, leaving with an impactful main event. And I know you have some interest or at least some thoughts on Pat McAfee and Adam Cole as well. And I know Justin and I talked about it. We don't really, I don't know. It's interesting because to me, McAfee is a heel. And like that puts Adam Cole in a weird position.
They're booking him as such, which I don't see it at all like that. I if I'm a fan, I want to see Adam Cole get his head punted. After what Adam Cole did on Pat McAfee's show, that's something a heel would do. That's not something a face would do.
But so what McAfee did in response was very much heel-like.
Yes. So I don't know if there is a heel and a face in this. And if there is, I don't know who it is. And I think that depends on who you are as a fan. But here's my interest, and here's my if NXT's watching, Sean and Triple H, when you're watching this, listen up, because this is how you do it. So if you want to get away with the screwy finish with Kross and Lee and continue this feud, which I actually wouldn't mind. I've enjoyed the feud between them thus far. I would like to see more of Kross's character work along with Keith Lee. So if you do the screwy finish, match gets thrown away. Like you said, the only other match that would probably main event would be Cole and McAfee. And here's how that's a main event level match. I think I'd bet my life savings that McAfee's going to win this match. Because what does that do for Cole if he wins? Congrats, you beat a punter. But why?
Conversely,
why,
if McAfee, do you anticipate McAfee continuing to wrestle?
I honestly would. I don't think that McAfee's the type of person. I think that he's someone that ever since he's retired from football, he's wanted to do something different every so often. He likes to change it up every once in a while. So, he's at Barstool. He still does his show, but he left Barstool, still does his show. Now he's not in WWE. Obviously, we had the whole baseball. Right. Like he's trying to dip his, he's dipping his sample into different palettes. But it's the thing is that with McAfee, if McAfee beats Cole, right, this just feeds into the story that NXT's been telling for a long time now since TakeOver Tampa. The story they've been telling is the slow unraveling of Adam Cole as a human and how insane he's becoming. He became corrupt with the NXT championship, and once he's lost that, he's becoming more and more like self-absorbed, I think. And that's going to drive him away from the Undisputed Era, I think. I think they're leading to the breakup of the UE. That's what I think it's ultimately going to be. The only way that Pat McAfee and Adam Cole is worth a main event level match is if the UE break up because Adam Cole lost to Pat McAfee. Plus,
and I think Vince McMahon is going to have a role in determining, will we bring up the Undisputed Era as a group?
I agree. And I think they should come up as a group. But then again, I could see like Fish and O'Reilly coming up as a tag team to add to the Raw division. And because Raw does need more tag teams. I mean, Angel Garza and Andrade are fighting at SummerSlam. Both shows
desperately need tag teams at this point, to be honest.
Yeah.
SmackDown has almost nobody.
Cole, as we've seen, can be a single superstar on his own. And then, honestly, Roderick Strong, I never really was much interested in him.
I don't think Vince is going to use him very well at all, to be honest.
I wouldn't. I don't see his. I mean, he's the Messiah of the backbreaker, but we already have a Messiah. So find a new gimmick. But my thing is that I think NXT is going to get a few more buy rates than usual with McAfee wrestling. So if I'm a not even casual fan, if I'm a McAfee fan,
are you?
And I want to see what's that?
Are you a McAfee fan?
A McAfee fan? Yes, I enjoy Pat. I think he's very, very entertaining. I've been very invested in this feud just because of how he's handled this, especially on social media. But if I'm just a regular guy that thinks McAfee's funny, doesn't follow wrestling, though, and I want to watch this happen, if I buy this event, don't you think I want to see Pat McAfee as the main event, not Keith Lee and Karrion Kross when I don't know wrestling?
Right.
I could see there are parts of this that there could be the main event.
The goal is, if you get new eyes to watch Pat McAfee, you want them to watch when he's not on as well, because they're interested or impressed by other people on there. And I think it would be very big for Keith Lee and Karrion Kross to win over some new fans. But I guess that could sort of come anywhere on the card. One other thing I wanted to touch on, which was very surprising, was a return to NXT this past Wednesday, and that's the Velveteen Dream. And we have seen both with AEW and WWE a lot of allegations from a couple months ago. Some guys were fired, some guys seemingly went unscathed. Others were taken off TV, and with AEW, they said, basically these people were going to a form of rehab or something of that nature. WWE doesn't really say what happens with those guys, so we know, Austin Theory has been off TV. Well, Velveteen Dream probably has as bad of allegations as just about anyone between those two companies. He was taken off after main eventing a takeover. He lost to Adam Cole. He's been gone. It seems like just one thing after another piling up on him. And now he's back. So, what was your reaction to this? Is this a potential disastrous move for WWE to continue to use him?
There is no right time to bring these guys back if you're going to.
Well, and should they have it all then?
Right, I know. But my next point is that a guy like Sammy Guevara and a guy like Velveteen Dream, who were so heavily involved in your programming before all this happened and developed, it's hard just to scrap that. It's hard to just throw that away. And it's not because it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, but correct me if I'm wrong, they are allegations. It is alleged.
That's
not
correct. That's
100% proven that, Sammy Guevara's was 100% proven, but Velveteen Dreams was a little more blurred lines in that case.
That's true, but I would also say the allegations would be way more severe, and those would be the ones against Velveteen Dream. Now, WWE has a policy. They have basically, if there's allegations, you're suspended, we conduct an investigation. If there's charges, you're indefinitely suspended. And if it's a conviction, you are fired, basically. So they have standards in place. So this leads us to believe that they did their own investigation and deemed that, okay, he's seemingly checked out, but there still could be charges down the road. We don't know about that. And that's where it becomes an iffy type of thing. With Sammy in AEW, he said some inappropriate stuff about Sasha Banks and whatnot, but probably not to the point where he's ever going to get a significant charge filed against him. The accusations against Velveteen Dream are pretty severe sexual misconduct with minors, potentially, where charges could be levied and would then hold decades in jail if he was convicted.
Correct. And I know that, but there's also, I'm going to be that guy when I say this. People still wear Ben Roethlisberger jerseys, there's always going to be there is the moniker innocent until proven guilty.
And with the Steelers, it worked out, but had another accusation or charges come against him down the road, they would have looked really bad for continuing that relationship with him.
Correct.
He corrected his behavior, and there was no...
And Velveteen Dream, if Dream does the same thing, then it's the same situation, I think. I'm personally one of the biggest Velveteen Dream fans you'll meet. I think he has the potential, if he keeps his slate clean, and even before all this, obviously, to be the best character in the company. I think what he can do in a promo sense and in the ring is just unmatched almost. He was always entertaining, and that's what wrestling's all about. There's almost, I see him and I see that sense of a young guy who, if he makes it big enough in the wrestling industry, could go mainstream like Cena and The Rock. Not saying that he'd be as big as them, but I think they had a mainstream star on their hands with Velveteen Dream, and they still do, and I think they see that. So that's why you can't just let that go.
Well, this is very similar to the Randy Orton promo from a couple weeks ago. He said, I got away with stuff that lesser guys would have been let go for because they saw my potential. They realized how much money was to be made with keeping me around.
And you know what? As much as that sucks to tell it how it is, that is what it is. It's, there's more of an attraction. There's more money to be made with Sammy Guevara than there is with Jimmy Havoc or whoever. There's more money to be made with, even though he hasn't been released, Velveteen Dream as compared to Austin Theory. It's just, and who was it? Jordan Devlin, and Jack Gallagher and people like that.
Right.
You can't. It's just like I said. It's how invested they were with those superstars before all this happened, and so that's the nature of the beast, and it stinks because you're right. You don't want to be the company that keeps that guy around knowing some stuff maybe that other people still don't know, and I'm not speculating at all trying to be like that, but what I'm saying is that all WWE can do right now is say, hey, look, we kept the guy off TV. He was out of your mind for a few months. The allegations have I haven't heard anything else since then about Velveteen Dream. Right. So if you're going to bring him back, just get the elephant out of the room, bring him back, and he's on TV again. So I think they did it about as if you wanted to bring Velveteen Dream on television this quickly for a purpose, they did it about as good as they could have done it, if you ask me.
Lastly, I want to talk about something a little bit more pleasant, and that is a pretty unexpected and unique debut on SmackDown last night. One that I was baffled by until some people helped me out on Twitter. AJ Styles is backstage yelling at this, heavy guy that sort of has like a little bit of a Jim Ross look to him. And I'm like, who in the world is AJ Styles talking to? And someone said, that's Robert Park. Well, you might know him as Abyss. And Abyss and AJ Styles were two of the biggest stars in TNA, later Impact. You can see him on the edge of this shot right now in the suit. Man, what a change. And I know you were new to wrestling. You were not watching TNA when Abyss was a big star. And I really never watched the promotion that much. But he was like Mankind type look. He had the long, scraggly hair. He had like a mask of sorts. He did a lot of hardcore stuff. And now this guy's in a suit and he looks like a guy that, works at a bank or something. And people just said how cool it was to see those two in a ring together. And then Jeff Hardy, who also had a pretty decent run in TNA for a while. And I think all three of these guys in some form worked together back then. Is this something that, they just kind of gave a little treat to the viewers who understood it? Or do you think that this guy actually has a role going forward with AJ Styles as sort of maybe a mouthpiece?
Well, I don't think AJ needs a mouthpiece per se. I enjoyed his promo last night before they got into all the statistics and Jeff Hardy coming out and everything. I enjoyed.
How bad was it though that he said, like, I watch baseball and I look at batting average? Come on, we know that there's way more important metrics than batting average now, right?
Right, of course. Yeah, watch Moneyball, AJ. Right. You'll get it. But the thing is that I loved it. I loved the fact that they took, because AJ Styles is a character, he's the phenomenal one, the face that runs the place. He's, now as the heel, he's the IC champion that nobody can live up to him. Nobody deserves, to be in the same ring as him because he has that prowess and that legacy of how great of a worker he is. But I love how they added the little wrinkle of, well, you know what? Everyone wants a shot at me. Let's make some statistical system to show who really deserves a shot with me. And then obviously, they did the whole board and they revealed it and it was nobody, obviously. But I love how they added a character to it. Like, they're investing in this idea that AJ being the I like to be logical with my title matches kind of heel. And, Jeff Hardy coming through.
Realistically, like, if the entire company took that model, we'd be okay with it, right? I mean, that's sort of, some people are like, is he taking a shot at AEW because they actually keep wins and losses and stuff like that? But really, it should be based on, like, deserving it if you win matches and not deserving it just because you want to call out the champion.
The funny thing is, my memory's kind of blurred, but I remember seeing, and like you said, I've only been a wrestling fan for about 3 or 4 years now, but I remember in one of the videos I was watching, just an interest, I think it was either TNA or it was WCW later on, did a point system where if you won your match, you got like 5 points. If you won by DQ, you got 2. If you lost by DQ, you lost a point. If you lost clean, you lost 5 points, whatever. And after like so many weeks or months or so or whatever, they determined a number one contender based on that point system. And that I saw that and I was like, that's awesome. It's kind of like sports.
That's sort of cool. Like, so yeah. Here's my thought: is wins and losses have to mean something. I don't think you need to go overboard and have it that much formulaic because then it creates some weird situations. I remember just recently NXT, the Cruiserweight, they sort of did that. Like, oh, you're 2-1 on your pool play. Now you move on, whatnot.
Yeah.
I think if you get too complicated, fans don't really care about that either because fans who want to watch like true sports,
I can see that.
But I think you can find a medium. Sure. Hey, this guy won at the last pay-per-view, and so now he deserves to be further up in contention. This guy lost at the last big pay-per-view, so he goes down on the list. He's not going to get a title match until he wins a few more matches. Something that simple.
And it makes sense for Jeff Hardy to be the next challenger because Sheamus took him out of the IC title tournament.
And then Jeff Hardy beat Sheamus.
Right. So Jeff Hardy's like, hey, I was kind of busy doing something else, but I came here for what I should be fighting for. Like that's a good logical story. Just telling, it's good, just good storytelling. And that's WWE's been kind of all over the place right now with Retribution, the middle school bullies. And
that's got to be a swerve, right?
What?
The people that they're using right now is not going to ultimately be the group. Well, first off, they'd expanded from 5 to like 20 people?
20. That's not a stable. That's a brand.
I think what it is it's going to be a smaller group or maybe just one person. And these are like what Big E basically said is they're foot soldiers. They're henchmen. This is not – the people doing this are not going to ultimately be the characters revealed to be in this stable. There's no way because they're coming across like sophomoric little kids, like you said.
Which is dumb. I mean, last night was their best attack, I think. Last night was their best, like, most violent looking, like, we should probably take care of them. But, like, if they break a window, nobody cares. Like, but it'd be kind of stupid if they had henchmen that won't be involved once the group's revealed. Like, are the 20 henchmen going to be revealed too? Or are they going to keep the ski masks on and just say, oh, they don't matter, but these 5 people do? Like, the only thing I can think of is if you're going to do this with 20 people, it's got to be NXT, right? Like, have you ever noticed how Retribution hasn't shown up on NXT yet?
Right.
Like, why is that? Or 205 Live.
But what in the world are you going to do with 20 NXT people?
That's my point. Like, is it going to go back to the Survivor Series build of, hey, don't forget about NXT. We won Survivor Series, so we're beating up Raw and SmackDown again. Like, what's the end game here? So, like, it's got to be either it's those 5 as the main, and then I don't know how the hell they got 20 people in it, but you can't. But if it's going to be that 20, it has to be a brand, right? Like, what stable has 20 people in it? I don't know.
I mean, the best thing I can say is people are saying, okay, maybe it's CM Punk and he's the leader. Something like that, where there's 1 or 2 people and they just get these people who are just, basically, again, foot soldiers working for them. But right now, no one's taking this group seriously as they're presented. So I think it has to be a red herring for something else.
If they, I mean, they're not smart, so they're not going to do this. But I actually would kind of enjoy it if this kind of tied back to the hacker.
Right. And people speculated that as well. Yes. And
the hacker had, those people doing whatever. I mean, that could be something. And God.
Someone even threw out the name, what if this is the way that they ultimately bring Roman Reigns back as a heel? Now, that seems far-fetched because they don't need to do something to get Roman over. But, like, they could make this something interesting. Again, though, this part of it has to be sort of just like the swerve part if it's going to have any impact.
I'd read that they were looking at some big summer-long angle after Mania till whenever. And I think they finally pulled the trigger on it because I think they know that this is going to be the way of wrestling shows for a while. So they just said, you know what, let's just do it. So I don't know what the end game is. They must know. But
don't give them too much credit. They might not know.
I know. But it definitely leaves me intrigued to know, okay, why does the group go from 5 to 20? And if so, are all 20 going to be meaningful? Which I doubt is the case, Otherwise, it's the NWO too, from
right. And the NWO at least started small, and then they kind of bloated too big. But at the beginning, It was very significant with their members. All right, Eddie, I think we covered a lot of the topics. Final thing for you: excitement level for SummerSlam, and then also hearing that the very next Sunday there'll be a pay-per-view. Is it too much? Is it going to kind of? Are they going to cancel each other out a little bit?
I'm definitely excited for the SummerSlam card. I think this is one of those cards where it's forcing WWE to do the right thing, and that is, build a card of your big 4 pay-per-views with your talent, with the talent that is full-time and that you're building right now.
Right.
There's no Brock, there's no Edge, there's no Undertaker, there's no part-timer on this show, right? I don't think there is. So and I'm still excited for these matches. I'm still excited for this card. I want to see Orton, McIntyre. I want to see The Fiend and Strowman. Even as convoluted as it's been, I want to see how that match plays out.
Sasha and Bayley both have singles matches against Asuka,
which I could see being turned into a triple threat winner take all, which maybe could main event. I don't know. I think that's logical, but that's, but yes, intrigue there just because of the Sasha Bayley storyline with how much they've invested time into that. They've actually added a somewhat interesting angle to the Raw Tag Team Championship match with the poisoning and everything. Retribution's going to show up with something. Like, SummerSlam has a lot of intrigue to it this year, and they've done it with their own talent. So this is why, going back to the first time I was on this show, this goes back to when I was saying I actually have faith that they know how to build these stars. They know how to build a card with their own stars. They just choose not to for whatever reason, and now they're kind of forced to. So I'm excited for SummerSlam. Payback, I mean, I can only imagine that it's rematches.
It's got to be, right? Or like things that they would have normally had on TV anyway.
And so there's that, but also like it could be like one of those network specials.
Right. That's sort of what it feels like to me.
And that's fine, but I don't know why you need to run a network special in a pandemic. Usually a network special means it's a specialized house show.
Yes.
And that's not happening. So unless it's like maybe a Raw TV pay-per-view, like what they did with the Great American Bash. I don't know, but I mean, they've already put on the advertising poster McIntyre, the Street Profits, Asuka, so you have to imagine they're going to be
Sasha
included.
and Bayley will defend the tag team titles too. So
yes, which is nice because that's a title that obviously won't be defended at SummerSlam. Right, so it'll be nice to have a little bit of wrinkle of something new into that. So I guess there's definitely intrigue with Payback, but I just have to see how the SummerSlam card plays out first.
All right, well, we appreciate it as always. By the way, and the camera's cutting off a little bit. Hold the shirt up so everyone can see that beauty that you got there. There we go. Elias, he's now on Patreon and Cameo. Check him out on there. That is one Eddie DiOrio. You can check him out as well. There's the Twitter handle. Eddie, thanks so much for doing this. We'll talk to you again down the road. In the meantime, Twitter, 5-Star Pod Wrestle, Instagram, 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Most importantly, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check out all the old videos. But for now, we're going to call it quits. We'll catch you again next week. It'll be here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.